Jason, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Luke.
Maybe to kick it off, love to hear just a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today, and can go from there.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Florida, went to MIT for undergrad, chemie, and then stayed for a PhD in bioengineering. And then we started Ginkgo right out of grad school back in 2008. So I know you have a lot of early career folks on here and people who might still be in school and that sort of thing. It's funny, it's not as common in biotech as it is in tech for people to start things out of school. Back in 2008, it was really uncommon. Even today, I was hoping it would have made more progress. But so maybe I'll share a little bit on it so people can see how we did it, because we were certainly not well supported by venture capital. Let's say that. We started this company in 2008. We can't raise money. Number one, we weren't trying to make a drug. So like Ginkgo has always tried to be a platform technology company. Nowadays, more like a CRO straight up, but platform services. So we weren't a drug. It was 2008. It's a pretty tough year. And children, right? We were like straight out of school, which the tech people think is cool and the biotech people don't, right? Yeah. And so we applied for grants. As a grad student, that's like, I think one of the things you learn how to do, right? You learn how to put a grant together, apply for stuff, write papers, all that sort of thing. That is a real, essentially fundraising skill set if you're up for basically being patient and continuing to live on your grad school salary for a few years, in our case for 5 years. And I think over that first 5-year period, we probably brought in $5 to $10 million of ARPA-E, DARPA, NSF SBIRs, those types of grants. And then we bought a bunch of equipment on eBay. We set up a lab here in the Seaport, which was at the time like the cheapest area of Boston. And we got the business going. And then once we had our feet under us and had our first service customers, then we could go raise capital. And we actually did Y Combinator back in 2014. We were the first biotech to do YC. And that was because Sam Altman, now like Mr. Famous at OpenAI, he had just taken over as president and he wanted YC to do hard tech, not just software, nuclear energy and biotechnology and materials. They wrote this blog post and I wrote him an email. I was like, Sam, this is like, hey, we're too late. We've been around for 5 years, but this is like oasis in the desert. We're like very tech minded. There's no money for people doing bio stuff like a tech company. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, you got to meet me. And so I went out to San Francisco, met him, and it was like love at first sight. Like we just loved YC. We ended up deciding to do it. Everyone out here, by the way, was like, why the hell are you doing YC? What do they know about biotech? So we did it, and then we basically got treated like a tech company. So we raised about $900 million over the next 7-8 years. That was like the heyday of all the Ubers and the big private rounds and that sort of thing. And then we took the company public in 21, like peak kind of COVID and boom times. And then over the last 4 years, we've been riding the roller coaster everyone else has been on biotech, which is pretty tough. And so happy to talk about all those different parts of it. But that very beginning, I think people shouldn't be afraid. Like now's a time that's a little bit like 2008.
Totally.
I spent the first year of Ginkgo, like with my co-founder, Barry, like driving a U-Haul around, taking stuff out of the stuff, like Austin and Ray Hall. Even Tom Knight, our MIT professor, is going around like collecting used glassware from these companies shutting down. And so it is a moment where you can get cheap stuff, you can get cheap space, you can get good employees, and you can apply for grants. So why not? I actually think now's a pretty great time to start a company.
Yeah, that's when, as Warren Buffett says, be greedy when others are fearful.
Yeah.
And I think it certainly applies to biotech. There's definitely a lot of fear going around. But having been in Boston now myself for about 13, 14 years, I will also say that Ginkgo has a special place in my heart. One, not only being one of the early examples of folks coming out of school to start a company, but then second, when I was starting one of my companies that went through YC back in 2015, I remember coming down from, I was in Somerville at the time to come see Austin and Barry, and they gave me a tour of the lab. It was only like one small little footprint at the time, but the generosity of the team and the culture and the willingness to help support the next wave of founders was something I very much admired and appreciated at the time. So very much appreciate that.
And by the way, that's another thing people should keep in mind. Like if you're doing a startup, if you email other founder-led startups, they'll give you a 30-minute call every time.
Yeah.
They've been there, right? It's a little different if you like go email the guy at the flagship company or something. He's not going to return your email. If it's another like founder-led biotech, you're going to get a reply. You should take advantage of that.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say that all of us who have been in the seat with the gun to the head have an obligation to the next wave of folks.
So, of course. Yeah, it's great. It's a fun thing to do. It's hard as hell. And like people are only doing it because they love it, because the odds are not in your favor.
Indeed. So with that, would love to maybe hear a little bit about Ginkgo and its current kind of manifestation. Sounds like you've made some really important calls on how you want to engage the market and enable the next generation of medicines and other biological products. So we'd love to hear a bit about the transition to being more of a service and tool-oriented model.
The history of Ginkgo, like our core technology, has been like automating lab work and trying to bring down basically like the unit economic of doing a biotech R&D project. That is the easiest way to think about it. We had our own take on that. Lots of robots, lots of liquid handling, droplet volume reduction, DNA synthesis, a whole thing, right? Lots of things we're technically excellent at. And you put it all together, though, what we're really trying to do is say it should cost less money and take less time to get to the biotech research outcome you want.
Yep.
And then we uniquely did that like in every market in biotech. We did industrial biotech, flavors, fragrance, nutrition, cosmetics, and then agriculture. You know, I remember all that animal-free meat stuff. We did a bunch of stuff there, all over the place. And then actually biopharma we got into about 5-6 years ago. So that's why a lot of folks in the biopharma industry didn't know Ginkgo as well. Like back in those YC days and stuff, we weren't actually doing anything in therapeutics yet.
Yeah.
Now it's the biggest part of our business. We work with Merck, we work with Pfizer, Novo Nordisk, Biogen, Boehringer. Yeah, like we have a lot of big biopharma, mid-sized biopharma customers.
And on that, like how much did you feel like the tech stack and capabilities of Ginkgo had to evolve to meet the needs of pharma? Or do you feel like it was just truly just a marketing and like kind of
There was an evolution. And the biggest one is that it's kind of like a 90-10 thing. Like outside of pharma, 90% of the work happens in non-mammalian organisms and 10% is in mammalian cells, and in pharma it's inverted.
Yeah,
and so we had to really bring online all of our show platforms, all our primary cell stuff, like everything like had to come online in the last 6 years or so. But like stuff like, say, building DNA is the same. It doesn't matter if it's going into a bacteria or a T cell, right? The fact that we can do these huge combinatorial gene libraries and build that stuff and all the synthesis excellence and all these things, like that pays off in both cases. Same with all our high-end analytics, same with our liquid handling expertise, on and on, like all those things like reapplicable. So we definitely weren't like starting from scratch, but we did have to build a new tech platform.
Yeah.
And so then the big change though has been really in business model. So for the last 10 years, the only way you could engage with me is real simple. It was a research partnership, right? Like it was like the deals that a small biotech, like a CRISPR Therapeutics would do at a Vertex, right? Not for the lead asset, but for the second or third asset. There's going to be some R&D fees, and then I'm going to take a royalty and milestones. And so we piled all those up, did 250 deals like that. It was a lot of work to close those deals. We still do that work. But in the last year, we've also opened the platform up with more of a CRO style business model, very proudly. In other words, like we will just do data gen for you for a fee.
Yep.
And so we have a service we call Data Points, which does that in particular for people building like AI models and things like that.
Yeah.
Functional genomics, tell us 3,000 CRISPR edits and we'll knock them out of your favorite host cell, mammalian cell, and then we will give you back drug-seq on all of them.
Totally.
Or we'll hit it with a 30,000 compound library and do the same thing. Or you send us 1,000 antibody sequences, we synthesize, express, and then give you back 10 different developability assays. And our sweet spot is complex protocols and assays run at high throughput. If it's a low throughput thing, you should call WuXi. We can talk, there's certainly like some geopolitical stuff there too, but in general, we're not trying to be cheaper labor. We're trying to be automated labs doing complicated experiments at high throughput.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you highlight the connection between the work that you're doing on the automation lab side with the AI demand that's out there, right?
Yeah.
Amongst pharma companies. Obviously, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yep.
For anything computational. But I'm curious if you're starting to see specific workflows or areas where there's the most amount of demand/impact that high throughput testing enables.
Yeah, the majority of our initial pull for this service has been on like being driven by people's ML teams and AI teams wanting. And I think what basically happened was everyone's like, wow, these models are pretty cool, like AlphaFold leading the way. And then just like what you're seeing now with the reasoning models is almost outrageous on the human language side. So people are like, wow, okay, this stuff works. You get everybody grab our data, right? Like go into the vaults and pull in all our data. Let's train it up. And then they like open the vault and they realize it's like basically empty because it's all the work was sort of done by disparate teams, even at these huge Merck or Pfizer. It's like these huge organizations, but it's like every little team is doing different stuff, not common controls, not common data standards. And even if you do the work to clean up the data, because you aren't treating it equivalently in biology, the details matter, obviously, as you know, around like the context of the experiment, everything else. If you don't have all that metadata, you're screwed. And so what quickly they learn is if I really want to do this, I got to basically generate new data sets, which the good thing is, man, like automation and stuff has actually moved a lot. We have lots of ways now, and omics technologies are freaking awesome now, like the cost of sequencing. You don't just sequence DNA anymore with sequencers. You get a ton of different readouts with high throughput, and then also high content imaging, which we do a ton of here too for customers. All that is you're kind of better off generating the relevant data set for your either target discovery effort, that's like kind of the functional genomics or the imaging, or for your drug development, where you're looking at things like developability. In either case, it's generate big assets. The other thing I think people learned was there's a lot of focus on like, I want to make a good antibody binder. those are things we're actually pretty good at with already very high throughput lab techniques and screening.
Yeah.
So if it's something where you can just throw phage display library at it or something and basically solve your problem, still with huge numbers, but like biology's kind of magic with that sort of stuff in the lab. AI is fine, but it's not a game changer. It's the expensive experiments. Developability assay for antibodies. Is it soluble? Is it immunogenetic? All these things that you can like, oh my gosh, they're expensive experiments.
Yeah.
Well, if you accumulate enough of that data, you suddenly can get predictability on the stuff that you never could before. That's pretty magical.
Yeah.
So we're seeing people like there's two things that have happened over the last 2 years since people got excited about AI. One, the realization that I don't have the data in-house, I got to make it. And then two, increasing sense of what problems in the drug development process
are worth it.
AI is actually transformative.
Yeah.
And it's taken some time to figure that out. And by the way, that is like still completely in flux. Like people are running all kinds of cool experiments right now.
Totally. I think that certainly mimics what we've been seeing, at least at Vibe, is that
Because you guys are using this to like even evaluate basically if something's a good drug, right?
Exactly. Well, I think to your point, when you talk about, say, the developability, right, there's hundreds of different parameters that feed into that. And I think it just highlights maybe the futility of humans trying to do that work by themselves, because you do need the complexity to be harnessed in real time. And one of the things I know both you and I come from more of a tech-oriented mindset is that in tech, you really just need the market to work. Everything else you can fit around it.
Yep.
In biotech, you have hundreds of different things that all need to have the stars align for that drug to be successful. And I think that's the problem where, AI could certainly help, but
100%. And I think we need to also just start like evaluating that systems problem as an industry. I sit down with tech people. It's kind of like, Sam will ask me this, what's wrong with biotech? And it's fascinating because what's the market for adding 2 years of healthy lifespan to people?
Massive,
It's almost incalculable. What is it, like $30 trillion or something? Like it doesn't even make sense. And then fill in the blank on any common human condition. And that's just health. Right, now go to food. Food is a monstrous market. Now go to building materials, monstrous market. These all absolutely, certainly we've already proven it in human health. The others, they're all biotech markets. So like, why are all our companies so small?
Yeah.
Even our biggest companies are small compared to the tech industry. What is our problem? And it is like a systems thing. Like it's just, we should dig in on this, but it's the cost to get to a working application. And it's so high and it's such a binary outcome that we don't really get substantial amounts of like generalist capital coming in.
Totally.
And so we're just choked off. And once we're choked off on the capital, we don't get to run enough experiments. So we don't get good enough. And that whole system's like, it's got to get torn down and rebuilt. And I think we're kind of in a moment where that could happen. I think you're seeing this with some of the changes that are coming out of the FDA. They just changed this animal study thing. Charles River's down 25%. Like we need new FDA, we need new CROs.
Yep.
Like the current platforms, the current CROs have not been serving the system well enough.
Yep.
They're way too expensive. They're way too slow. And as a result, even though we have the markets for it, like we don't get to play like tech. And we're at such a crisis point right now that I actually think that change might happen.
Yeah. I think there's certainly something's going to change, that's for sure. And I think you're seeing a pressure across all sides, whether it's payers to patients to financiers, et cetera, public markets, of course. So just to maybe put a point on kind of the CRO model and the data point service, when you start to engage with biopharma companies, as an example, what's the key salient points of value you think Ginkgo can now offer with this both new business model and new set of services?
Yeah. So today, the big stuff is largely around if you want to generate a really big data set where the data is like high quality and consistent for basically doing machine learning and AI, you should call us.
Yep.
Before you build your own big internal operation to do it, or before you just try to go to war with the small amount of data points you have, it's really very reasonable to do these types of projects now. We're like literally we do these runs every week so we can turn around data in some cases in a month, right? And then by the way, if you're new to AI, we can also help folks with the model training as well with our AI team. So that I think is like probably the initial inlet. But the other thing that's what I see as an opening is really to work across the whole process. So like our aspiration ultimately is to just get that cost down. Like right now, for you to go from a concept you have, like a target you want to go after, to say like a phase 1B or phase 2 result, you're looking at, if you were incredibly efficient, it's like 15 or 20 million bucks. And if you're not, it can be hundreds of millions. That's your value creation point. We're seeing this now as capital markets have dried up and there's less loose money around. Yeah. We are now down to the brass tacks of what shows value for a drug, and it's demonstration in patients. End of story. So if it costs you, let's just talk venture economics. If that costs $30 million then you have to, as an investor, believe that like you're getting enough money to get to that value inflection point, or else the next investor that comes behind you is going to screw you. So you have to believe that there's $30 million to come into this like coin flip. That is so hard to get in seed capital. You know this. 30 million bucks, like good luck.
Yep.
If that number was instead 3, we would have 10,000 new biotechs. Anyone who had a view on a certain human condition or a family member with a disease or whatever would be like, yeah, okay, I'll give you $250,000. It happens all the time out of YC. Oh yeah, you have coffee with somebody and they made a bunch of money on Facebook and they're like, yeah, sure, I'm in. You would only need 12 people like that and you're making a drug. Our problem is really fundamentally that cost. And that cost is a mix of the regulatory rules and the CROs that have captured that regulatory pipe and are basically like overcharging on it.
Yep.
And so that mix of things is just killing us.
Yeah.
And if we don't fix that systems problem, we're stuck.
And so just like juxtaposing that with,
and so I want to fix that. To get to my point, I'm starting, like we're here with the AI stuff, but what I really want to give you is I want you to be able to call me with your favorite drug asset and say, all right, I want to go after this target.
Yep.
And I'm like, great. I'll find you a mAb, I'll get it made, and we'll do the GMP, we'll do the trials, and the whole thing's going to cost you $3 million.
Yeah.
That's what I would like to see happen.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. That's the vision. There's some things to get done there. But frankly, if you look at some of the prices, like trials in China now and stuff.
Yeah. It's coming down.
Way down. So I really think there's like opportunities there, if that makes sense.
Totally. I think the other piece is misalignment of incentives around when you're charging cost plus, right?
Yeah,
because we saw the defense industry, just in the CRO world, it definitely changes the incentive structure.
Yeah, taking longer gets you paid more, right?
Yeah.
It's relentless, man. It's tough, right? You're from tech world. Like what tech has done amazingly over the last 60 years is frequent changes in the fundamental architecture of how like software and computers are like deployed in the market. And so that industry has gotten real comfortable with, yeah, of course there's going to be another. We went mainframes, then we went mini computers, then we went personal computers, then we went mobile. Remember when Zuck was trying to like stick something on your face? They're like, what's the next one? You know, it's going to be talking to computers is what it's obviously going to be. That all happened over the same period of time where more or less we had one change, which was biotech drugs.
Yeah.
So we had protein-based therapeutic. That came online.
Yeah, that's
the only real change we've had. So we had one platform change. By the way, that printed. And so you can see what happened. So where the hell? So I just think our industry's not as comfortable with like leaning in on those changes. There's a lot of like self-defeatism. No, that can never work. And no, why would you ever try to do anything differently? And like on and on. And so there's only a few places that are willing to like pound against that. It sucks until the change happens, and then it's very lucrative. We're pounding on that change because at the end of the day, and I think now is a moment where you see it as like the waters have retreated on the capital markets. If something doesn't change about the system, we might break the whole thing down. Like it's freaking Kendall Square's drying on this fucking article in Boston Globe yesterday. Like, oh, what's going to happen? Biotech going to exist. We need a systems change.
Yeah, I think a third of lab space in Boston area is empty. Yeah, it's a great example.
30% of the deals of $50 million last year were Chinese biotechs.
Yeah.
Up from 5% in 2020. Yeah. That's us losing it. That is the U.S. losing it. So where are the people who are like, hey, red alarm, like it's time to fix the system?
I think that's a really important point. And I feel like I'd love to drill in on that to some degree, especially when it comes to the Chinese piece, because obviously the geopolitical threat, the economic threat, the technological threat spans not just biotech, but also AI, semiconductors, energy, et cetera, et cetera. Focusing on biotech, how should the U.S. be thinking about competitiveness? I know you've also got a unique perch, not only as the CEO and founder of a publicly traded company in biotech, but also from a defense and national security standpoint.
Yeah.
Love to just hear your lay of the land of that competitive tension. And if there's 2 or 3 things that could enable us as a country, whether it's from the CRO standpoint or biotech standpoint, to level up, what would those things be in your mind?
Yeah, I had the honor to get to chair this National Security Commission I did it for about 18 months and I stepped down, and now Todd Young is the senator from Indiana. He's the chair. And the report just came out last Thursday. I encourage everybody to read it. And it is basically a commission where the idea was, hey, there was one on AI like 5 years ago, like strategic technology to the U.S. How do we make sure we remain competitive? And it's not just for pharma, to be clear. So in fact, Defense Commission, like a lot of the applications were things like materials and food security and biosecurity and infectious disease. And all these things like were as or more important than pharmaceuticals. And so here's like my 2 cents on it. I think one of the big levers is how we handle regulation, and in particular outside of pharma. I'll just get on a soapbox for 1 second. If you go back and look, back in 1982 or whatever, like Genentech is hitting the world. I have this great Time magazine cover from 1981 with Herbert Boyer on the front. He's got the friggin' hair and the mustache, and up in the cover, big picture, and like DNA, helices everywhere. And up in the top right corner is like a little picture of Princess Diana and saying she's getting engaged. That's the level of like biotech punch we had. Herbert Boyer was before the Princess Diana was like second fiddle. Okay, like absurdity. So it was like the AI of that time. And so they had the exact same regulatory conversation that we're having about AI right now, which is frankly why the tech industry freaked out and leaned in to get Trump elected. The question was like, are we going to regulate the use of AI, period? Or is it really about if AI is going into a healthcare application, then FDA is going to look at it. If it's going into the internet, no one's going to regulate it. If it's going into this other thing, it's going to be okay. And that's basically where it looks like AI is headed. It's like, yeah, depending on what you go and if it's going into a drone, okay, that's going to have one set of things. But if it's just on your phone, it's going to be pretty lightly regulated. All right. Same conversation happened with biotech. And there's a document, executive order under Reagan called the Coordinated Framework for the Regulation of Biotechnology. And if you read that document, it's a fantastic document. And it says, and by the way, this has been updated under 3 different presidents since, most recently, the first Trump administration. It basically still says the same thing, which is genetic engineering is like fire or electricity. It is a general purpose technology. And if you try to regulate just the use of it, you're going to cut off all the myriad applications you could have. Instead, we need to regulate the end applications based on what they are.
Yeah.
Very plain. All right. Of our government regulators, there's only one that really follows that, the FDA. So the FDA, if you show up and you bring a small molecule or you bring a gene therapy, they're like, hello, let's talk safety. Okay. We're presuming unsafe for both of those. And you're going to go through a similar process. Whole thing's obviously slight, variations in like the techniques and whatever, but the gist is it's the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's do that with cotton. And let's say you engineer cotton to make a new fiber to have an alternative to Kevlar or something. Okay. Lighter weight, grown in the United States. Okay. And you've engineered this cotton and you show up to the USDA to go get approval to sell it. First question they ask you, did you genetically engineer this cotton? In total violation of these executive orders. All right. It should be treated just like bread cotton. And it should go through, not saying it should be unregulated, but it should go through the same regulation as the people making new cotton seeds every year. Yep. No problem. There's a regulation for that. Just put it right in there. Instead, it has a whole separate made up regulation because it uses electricity, because it uses genetic engineering, because it uses AI. All right. And that's why outside of pharmaceuticals, where the FDA does treat biotech fairly, all other markets for biotech are garbage.
Yeah.
It's because in every case, biotech is disadvantaged versus the competing technology because the agencies are not following the executive order.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, and so that, if I could change one thing, I would change that. Because for all those national security applications, many of them are outside of human health. It is all these new materials. It is food security. It's all this stuff. And right now, it's a killer for the innovation ecosystems in the Midwest, where all our best agronomic people are. They have their hands tied behind their back. They're not allowed to develop any new products. It's a real problem. Just so you see it for like a wider picture, that's what I think is the biggest one.
That's awesome. The thing that strikes me is that maybe the mental model here is not regulate the inputs, but regulate the outcomes.
100%. Right? Absolutely. And that is what the executive order says.
Yeah.
That's what's so crazy about it.
Interesting.
And so I'm hopeful, like we'll see if some of that stuff starts to change, but I think that would really unlock innovation in the Midwest, in this country in particular.
Yeah, amazing. Obviously, all those different industries have such large contribution, right, to GDP as well. So innovation and growth there certainly.
And they're important, right? This is the other thing that like why biotech, again, it's like what's wrong with biotech, right? It's like programmable. Just like computers. So it has this like enormous flexibility. That's why computers are so amazing, right? Like you put in new code and it does something new the next day. Mm-hmm. Cells are just like that. Like you slap new DNA in there and the next day it's doing a brand new thing.
Yeah.
Except computers only move information around, man. By the way, information's important. Yeah, I like to send emails and Ghibli pictures of my family or whatever. Like all that stuff is fun. Yeah, we can do legal docs.
Yeah.
But hey, we all live in the world of atoms, okay? Your family is made out of atoms. The food you eat is made out of atoms. Your house is made out of atoms. Like, that's all the stuff that actually matters. Oh. Biology, this is the programmable atom technology.
Yeah.
It's the important one. It's just this crazy disconnect. God, man, I'd love to unstick it. And so I do think in pharma, it's like slightly less about the regs and more about the cost, even though like obviously you're seeing innovation. Why is Australia's trials faster than ours? Why is China's trials cheaper than, some of that is actually just the regs, but some of it is the CROs.
Yeah.
Outside of it is all the regs.
Yeah.
And if we don't fix it, then we can just never get this technology.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the component around atoms, right? I think that's a fair point that biotech is not only about the generation of data, but it's also about the manipulation of atoms. Remember, actually, when we were just walking around here earlier before we started this recording and discussion, I got a chance to see some of the labs here in Seaport and Dry Dock. Really impressed by the new sort of modular, scalable kind of automation systems you guys have started to build out and started to get in the hands of people outside of your own four walls. Love to just learn a little bit more about that and what maybe specific processes or circumstances you're finding as being the most opportune, right, for that tech stack.
Yeah. So this is another entrepreneur lesson for people tuning in. We have always been like automation freaks, right? Like our whole view was you can't really try things in the lab. You don't learn fast enough. Then you can't like improve your ML. You can't improve even just your general thinking. And so from 15 years ago, but really the last 10 where we raised money, it's always been a big investment in automation. And then there's a company called Cymergen out in California that was also similar they were like our kind of peer trying to do broad platform genetic engineering. And so they had the same problems we did. So they invented, in their case, I mean, it's like little California vibes. They started to build their own hardware. They're like, screw this. I was buying everything from Hi-Res out here. And they were like, no, we're going to make our own hardware systems because there's like a bunch of problems with the Hi-Res stuff. And in particular, they invented this technology, we call it reconfigurable automation carts, racks. And it's basically like a single piece of equipment, a robotic arm, and a piece of Magna Motions, like a material transport track that you can move plates on like a train car on. And you just Lego block these carts together. And if you were like, hey, I need these 7 pieces of equipment in an integrated setup, which if you went to a traditional automation vendor is like, all right, let's start the engineering work, make the 3D model, price it out. And a year from now or 18 months from now, we'll get it installed. It's a custom engineering job. In our case, we'll just send over the 7 pieces of equipment in the carts and stick them together in a week. So it's just a different mindset because the pieces are all pre-built. Anyway, so that's the general idea. The entrepreneur lesson is when I acquired Cymergen, they had started to sell these. The team there was really passionate about this. And they're right. The technology is totally killer. This was like 3.5 years ago. And so they had sold to a couple customers, pharma startup, a national lab. And as soon as I bought them, I was like, you have to stop selling them. This is like my infinite wisdom. And that was because our business model was research partnerships. I was an equipment company. And if I gave away the equipment, other people would have all of Ginkgo's secret sauce. Again, foolish. You're better off trying to build an ecosystem. So we're like, okay, I realized in the last year, I'm an idiot. And we should start selling these things. And it's been great. And basically the use cases are people building like high throughput screening, like the traditional uses for work cells, high throughput screening, compound management, and then also diagnostics. So we're selling into diagnostics companies, which has been really good too. So it's really any place where you would be building an integrated automation system. Today, these I think are a better option and they're expandable. The big selling point that customers are most excited about is like when you build a traditional work cell, in 5 years, you're decommissioning it. So all that money is just evaporating. With these, as you need it to do new things, you just add more Lego blocks. The other ones don't die. And you swap them out. We'll take one back and give you a different one. It's just a system that doesn't like automatically atrophy, right? So anyway, I think of it more like an automation core.
So last quick question on that, which is, I'm sure you've walked through a bunch of automation labs in pharma. There's often that component that they need the high-res type bespoke approach because my process is special. I'm using air quotes here for the audience because you can't see it. But when you actually walk through, what portion of a given pharmaceutical automation lab do you think actually is composable with the existing pieces that you guys already have versus it actually needs to be bespoke and done custom?
So this is actually a really important point to clarify. So almost 100% can be moved onto the carts because
crazy, right?
You are getting your custom protocol. That's just moving into the software layer. Nothing about the hardware has to be customized for your thing. I just need to know what equipment you need. And then it needs to be able to be sent on plates. So the only thing where it would be different is if it can't move it on a plate, like a 96, 12, 384, 15, whatever plate, then you might need a more custom automation setup. But if you can transfer your samples on plates, and then it's basically any piece of lab equipment we can stick in these things. And that's the magic. And then we connect directly into the software of the equipment. So your people also don't need to be like, you just write code in our software language, and you could have an integrated automation system in any piece of equipment without getting into the software, the heinous software of all these different vendors because they're all totally different. So anyway, all that is like really magic. It's like people love it when they experience it. People that have had it the last 2 or 3 years are very happy customers. I wish I had more of them. I wish I let them sell it 3 years ago. But anyway, we are building up a new customer base. So it's been pretty cool.
Well, I think that's just an important, takeaway, at least for the audience, is that you can either go through an 18-month long period or you can get in 2 weeks up and running, especially when you can modularly construct whatever workflow you actually need at a time when speed and pace is so critical. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
think
it's just a
that's
new
huge
way of
advantage.
thinking about it. And this is, again, part of our shtick is like, what can we do to change systems? The reality is automation has barely penetrated R&D.
Totally.
Like you walk into the labs at Merck or whatever, it's just seas of benches and so on. And automation is relegated to the automation team and high throughput screening.
Yeah.
What's up with that? And a big part of it is like what I just said. You have to justify the ROI for your automation setup with the one experiment it's running all the time. And there's not a lot of experiments that justify a multi-million-dollar automation work cell from a high res or something. There's just not.
Totally.
But if that same work cell could actually do 20 or 30 different experiments, and you can imagine that by just adding one more piece of equipment, next year when you need something you can't even think of right now, it'll be able to do that too. Suddenly ROI is way easier to swallow. And that's what customers are biting on. Yeah.
Makes sense. The last topic here, I think that's particularly critical, and I think you're in a unique position to comment on, is the broader market and capitalization for biotechs. Sounds like you've raised almost $1 billion privately.
Yeah.
You went public in a SPAC, if memory serves,
Yeah, that's right.
a few years ago.
Raised $1.5 billion.
And then now you've got, let's call it 9 figures plus on the balance sheet. And obviously as a publicly traded company, have other types of pressures. Love to hear your take on the broader biotech market and how you're seeing the financing landscape shake up given the criticality capital plays in biotech.
Yeah, it is a tough market right now for biotech. I mean, we were very fortunate that we raised so much at the listing, right? So we have $550 million plus in the bank. We have effectively no debt other than leases and things. So we're very strong balance sheet wise. We had been spending too much, so I did large layoffs and so on last year just to tighten up. But like on the other side of that, have like greatly reduced our burn. So we're like stabilized. But what I've been telling the team here is like, right now, biotech's an endurance sport. It's not 3 or 4 years ago during COVID, especially, it was like definitely a sprinting sport, right? Like you could run into an area. And when we built a $300-400 million crazy revenue business during COVID, just popped it off in 18 months, right? So certain times it is a sprint game, but right now it's very much an endurance game. And so I think a lot of what people need to focus on is just getting to brass tacks for service business, especially like getting to profitability, staying tight, making sure your war chest is big enough that you have a big margin of safety. There's no danger that you need to raise money when you don't want to and all that stuff. So that's one thing. And then I think we're watching, like, what's it going to change? And I think it's a good question, right?
It
like,
felt like it was starting to change, right? End of last year, early this year.
A little bit, yeah. I think you had again, it's funny because like I'm close with all these tech guys because of doing Y Combinator and everything. And Trump gets elected, new administration. It was like Christmas. Like all the AI stuff was on, risk was back on crypto, risk was back on robotics and rockets, like all these crazy things that when interest rates went up, all those things crashed too. It wasn't just biotech. Everything crashed. Anything long dated was like, see you later, which is like, this is how America's capitalist, right? The interest rate, investors will move their money where they can get the best return. And we were not that as interest rates went up, right? Now you're seeing this difference where like certain areas of long dated stuff is perceived as a big part of the future in the United States. And then those things, even though interest rates are still high, they're going to return. And so you're seeing that money going in there. Biotech needs to show that we belong on that list. We really do. And by the way, we belong on that list. Like for all the reasons I said earlier, what's more important than health and wellness for people? Fundamentally, literally it is the number one thing. If you lose it instantaneously, then it's actually the number one thing. Okay. So like nothing is more important than health and wellness. Food security, biosecurity, right? Like we're very, from a national security perspective, what happens if we had a COVID for corn in this country? Right? What the hell? We're seeing this with like the avian stuff. We can't play around with this stuff, right? Like
prices went up because of that, right?
That's the least of our worries. You got to really watch it. And that's before you get to like human infectious disease. Like it's almost so traumatic. We like to not even think about COVID. But man, that shut the country down. That cost us several $1 trillion, cost us millions of lives, and it grounded an aircraft carrier. That hasn't happened since World War II. You telling me that's not a national security threat? Biotechnology, both the ability to respond to like biological attacks, biosecurity, food security, this stuff is top of list. It is, period. But we got to get that into this administration. We got to make sure people understand that. We got to engage with new leaders in HHS, FDA, NIH, right? We got to show them biotech matters. Here's why it matters. And if we do, I think that's part of like us getting out of the funk. Yeah. Just on like pure capital market side. Then on a system side, it's what we talked about earlier.
Right.
Fix the system, like new CROs, new scale, automation, AI, reduction in costs for all the trials, like all that stuff also has to happen. Okay. Those two things come together, watch out, right? If capital markets came back on and in the process of this pain, we actually forced ourselves to do some systems change, then on the other side, you're like the internet in 2008. It's like cloud computing's on, money's coming back in, and wow, like our fundamental unit economics got better and everybody wants it. Then, hey, the good times roll, right? But that's like the up case, is if we play that. The down case is we put our heads in the sand. We don't actually change the system. We don't want to prove our value to anybody, and we like death spiral. And I'm certainly not going to let that happen, but we as an industry should step up.
Yeah. And so to close out here, like, what is one piece of advice you would give a fellow CEO of a biotech company that's in their earlier phases of their life and is looking at the current state of the markets and feels like they're looking over a cliff?
Yeah.
What's like the one thing you think they should be keeping in mind or doing or managing their organization given the complexity and difficulty of the current market?
That is a great question. It depends a lot on the kind of biotech you're in. I do think the number one thing is to move fast on what you think. If you think things are going to be like X in a year, like you're like, we're going to like, if this and this don't happen, we're going to hit a wall in a year. Move now. I think people wait too long and basically only move on doing the painful things when their back's against the wall. And by the way, when your back is against the wall, the painful things are 10 times more painful.
Yeah.
They're still painful, but they're so much more rational when your back's not against the wall.
Yeah.
Like never get your back against the wall.
Yeah.
That would be my main advice. And right now you're in an environment where like it's way easier to get your back put up against the wall. So you got to watch it.
Yeah. Makes sense. Jason, want to thank you for being on the
And
podcast
don't give
today.
up. Also,
Yes.
sorry,
That's
that
right.
was the other thing I was going to say.
Yeah.
Don't give up. Don't give up on biotechnology. I think that's the other thing that we should all remember.
100%. One thing I'd echo on that is don't give up. I'd also say, whether it's your team, your investors, your customers, the patients you want to serve, they look to you not necessarily to have a plan, but to have a idea of what you're going to do next.
Yeah.
What's the first step you're going to take to make progress against the problem or tackle the uncertainty? Because we all know this is difficult, but I think they're looking to you to lead in that way.
Yeah.
And I feel like what you've done here at Ginkgo is a great example of that. So I think it continues to be a good lighthouse for the rest of us who are building in this space. So thanks.
We won't give up. I'll tell you that.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining. Really eager to hopefully check in again, perhaps in a year when markets have recovered and we've also knocked down the cost of drug development by an order of magnitude, et cetera, and check in at that point.
Sounds great. Look, thanks for having me on.